You knew I would find out.
Don't act surprised.
Ladies, please.
You wanted a perfect night, I said, watching the champagne ripple in my glass, but you forgot I was part of the story. The room went quiet in a way that didn't feel accidental, like even the music knew something was about to break. 100 guests stood under crystal chandeliers, soft gold light reflecting off polished marble floors, every detail curated to impress: white roses, linen tables, a string quartet playing something classical that no one was really listening to anymore. Victoria Hayes loved control. She loved appearances even more, and tonight was supposed to be her masterpiece, her party, her narrative, her version of family. I was standing near the edge of the room, exactly where I'd been placed, close enough to be seen, far enough to never matter. I adjusted the cuff of my sleeve, smooth black silk, the kind you don't buy unless you've earned it yourself. No one here knew that. Not my father, not Victoria. Not the guests sipping $1,000 bottles. Like, it meant nothing. To them, I was just Emily, the quiet one, the one who should be grateful to be included. Then it happened. A single moment, sharp and sudden, not loud, not chaotic, just deliberate enough to shift the entire room. Victoria stepped closer, her smile still perfectly in place for the audience, her voice low, controlled. "You embarrassed me," she said, as if stating a fact that required no explanation. I didn't respond. I didn't argue. I didn't move. The air tightened. A few people turned. Someone lowered their glass. And just like that, the performance changed. If you've ever stood in a room where you realized you were never meant to belong, you already know what that feels like. And if you're still here, take a second to like and subscribe, because what happened next is the kind of moment people wait years for. I stayed still. I let the silence settle. Somewhere across the room, near the back wall, a man in a dark suit watched everything unfold, without reacting, his expression unreadable, like he was waiting for something specific. Not yet, I thought. Not yet. My phone vibrated once in my hand. A message. I didn't need to read it. I already knew what it would say. "We're ready when you are." I lifted my gaze, meeting Victoria's eyes, her confidence still intact, still certain this would end, the way it always had. She thought this was control. She thought this was power. I understood something else entirely. This wasn't the moment I lost. This was the moment everything shifted. The silence did not break right away. It stretched thin and controlled like a held breath across the entire ballroom. I could hear the faint clink of glass somewhere to my left, a delayed reaction from someone who had not yet realized the room had shifted. Victoria stepped back half an inch, just enough to re-center herself, just enough to make it look intentional. Her hand moved to smooth the fabric of her ivory dress, the same way she always reset the scene when something went off script. Appearances first. Always. My father was already moving toward us, not quickly, not urgently, but with that measured pace he used when he believed he could still contain something before it turned into a problem. His eyes flicked between us, calculating, assessing who needed to be corrected. It was never her. It was always me. "Emily," he said quietly, his tone carrying more warning than concern, "do not make this into something bigger than it is." I looked at him, really looked this time. And for a moment, I saw exactly what he thought was happening. A small disruption. A daughter stepping out of line. A situation that could be smoothed over with the right words, the right posture, the right performance. He still believed he was in control of the narrative. I said nothing. I did not need to. Around us, the guests had begun to reorganize themselves into quiet observers. Conversations dropped into whispers. Phones lowered, but not completely. People were watching now, not casually, but intentionally. That was the thing about rooms like this. They fed on moments like these. Victoria noticed it too. Of course she did. Her smile returned precise and practiced the version she used when she needed to reassure an audience that everything was still exactly as it should be. "It is just a misunderstanding," she said lightly to the nearest cluster of guests, her voice carrying just enough to reach the right ears. "Emily has always been a little sensitive." A few polite nods followed. Someone laughed softly, uncertain, eager to align with the version of events that felt safest. I felt the phone still in my hand, the faint warmth from the screen against my palm. Another vibration. I did not check it. I did not need to confirm what I already knew. Instead, I shifted my weight slightly and placed my glass down on the nearest table, carefully, deliberately, the stem touching the linen with a soft, controlled sound. Small movements mattered. They always had. My father exhaled, relieved, too early, mistaking my stillness for compliance. There, he said under his breath, as if the moment had already passed. That is better. But across the room, the man in the dark suit had not moved. Not a step. Not a glance away. He was still watching, waiting with the kind of patience that does not belong to guests. It belongs to people who know exactly when a moment is about to turn. And I understood something then with absolute clarity. They thought this was over. They thought silence meant submission. They thought the story would end the way it always had. I let that belief settle in the room. I let it grow just enough to feel real. And then I reached for my phone. I unlocked the screen slowly, not out of hesitation, but out of precision, the same kind of precision I had learned over years of being watched, corrected, and quietly dismissed in rooms exactly like this one. The message was exactly what I expected. 3 words: we are ready. No punctuation, no urgency, just confirmation. I did not reply. I never needed to. My father shifted beside me, his posture tightening just enough to signal that his patience was thinning, but not enough to draw attention. He leaned in, slightly lowering his voice the way people do when they think control is something you can whisper back into place. Put the phone away, he said, calm but firm. This is not the time. I glanced at him, then back at the screen, letting the moment stretch just long enough for him to feel it slipping. He still believed this was about behavior. About respect, about me correcting myself. He did not understand that the rules had already changed. Across the room, Victoria had resumed moving through her guests, her laughter light controlled, almost effortless, as she reassembled the illusion she had spent weeks preparing. She touched shoulders, adjusted glasses, leaned into conversations, each movement deliberate, each smile calculated. To anyone watching from the outside, the moment had already been rewritten. A small misunderstanding, a sensitive daughter, a flawless host continuing her evening, but the room was different now. I could see it in the way people glanced back toward me quickly, then looked away, in the way conversations restarted a little too carefully, in the way no one fully relaxed. They felt it, even if they could not name it. The man at the back of the room had taken one step forward, just one, enough to close the distance slightly, not enough to interrupt. His attention never shifted, not to Victoria, not to the guests, only to me. My phone felt steady in my hand, lighter than it should have, like the weight of it no longer mattered. I thought about the years that led here, not in detail, not in emotion, but in structure. Every dinner where I was corrected, mid-sentence. Every event where I was introduced last, if at all. Every quiet moment where I learned exactly how much space I was allowed to take up. It had never been random, it had been consistent, designed, maintained, and I had let it stand, until now. I tapped the screen once, bringing up the contact that had never needed a name. Just a number. Clean, direct, final. My father noticed the movement immediately. Of course he did. His hand tightened slightly at his side, not touching me, not stopping me, but close enough to suggest he still believed he could. Emily, he said again, this time sharper, the warning no longer hidden. I lifted my eyes to meet his steady clear without hesitation. You should step back, I said quietly. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough. For the first time, he did not respond right away. That was new. I pressed call. The line rang once, then silence. Not empty silence, waiting silence. I lowered the phone slightly, not away from me, just enough for the room to see that something had started. And across the ballroom, the man in the dark suit finally moved. He did not rush. That was the first thing I noticed. The man in the dark suit moved through the room with a calm that did not belong to a guest, each step measured, deliberate, like he had already decided the outcome, long before anyone else realized there was a situation to resolve. Conversations faltered as he passed, subtle at first, then more obvious heads, turning voices, lowering a ripple of recognition moving across the room that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with him. My father saw it next. I watched the exact moment his expression shifted not into fear, not yet, but into something tighter, more alert, the kind of look he used when he realized variables had changed outside his control. "Who is that?" he murmured, more to himself than to me. I did not answer. I did not need to. Victoria noticed seconds later, her voice trailing off mid-sentence as the small circle around her subtly reoriented, tension drifting past her shoulder toward the approaching figure. She turned, smile still in place, expecting another guest, another opportunity to perform, and then it paused just slightly, just enough to reveal the first crack. Recognition, not the kind that brings comfort, the kind that rearranges priorities instantly. The man stopped a few feet away from us, close enough to command the space without raising his voice, without needing to announce himself. He did not look at my father first. He looked at me. A brief, confirming glance, nothing more. I gave the smallest nod. That was enough. Then he turned. "Victoria," he said her name. Steady, precise, carrying across the immediate circle without effort. Not loud, not aggressive, just undeniable. The kind of tone that assumes attention rather than asking for it. The room quieted further, the background music now completely irrelevant, guests openly watching, no longer pretending this was a private moment. Victoria straightened instinctively, her posture resetting, her voice carefully composed when she responded. "I did not realize you would be attending," she said, the sentence polished, but the timing just slightly off. "I was not planning to," he replied simply. A pause, controlled, intentional. But I received a call. My father's gaze snapped toward me sharp, now searching for something he could still correct, still contain. But there was nothing left to adjust. That part had already passed. The man reached into his jacket, not hurried, not dramatic, and withdrew a thin folder, the kind used for documents that do not require explanation, only confirmation. He held it loosely, not presenting it yet, just letting it exist in the space between us. "Before we continue," he said, glancing briefly at the surrounding guests, acknowledging the audience without performing for them. "I believe there are a few details that need to be clarified." The word clarified settled differently than anything else that had been said tonight. It did not suggest emotion. It suggested correction. Victoria's smile returned again, but this time it was thinner, more deliberate, held in place rather than natural. "I am sure whatever this is can wait," she replied smoothly, already trying to redirect, to move the moment back into her control. He did not look at her when he answered. "It cannot." 2 words. Calm. Final. And for the first time that night, the room did not belong to her anymore. No one moved. Not Victoria, not my father, not even the guests who had been pretending just seconds ago that this was still a celebration. The word cannot hung in the air heavier than anything else that had been said tonight. It was not loud. It was not aggressive. It was simply final. The man opened the folder with the same controlled precision he had carried into the room, revealing a set of documents clipped neatly together, each page aligned, each edge clean. The kind of detail that suggested nothing inside had been left to chance. He did not hand them over immediately. Instead, he turned the top page slightly, just enough for Victoria to see, just enough for recognition to land. I watched her eyes flicker just once, just briefly, but it was there. That small shift people make when they realize something exists that they cannot explain away. "This concerns the property on Westbrook Avenue," he said, his voice even almost conversational, as if he were discussing something routine, something expected. But nothing about the way Victoria held her posture now was routine. My father stepped forward, his tone tightening as he tried to reclaim the moment. "If there is a misunderstanding, we can address it privately," he said, the words measured, controlled, still attempting to reduce this back into something manageable. The man did not look at him. "Not yet. There is no misunderstanding," he replied. Another pause. Longer this time. "There is a discrepancy." That word landed differently. Not emotional, not personal, Structural. My father's jaw set slightly, a subtle shift that most people would miss, but I did not. I had seen it before in meetings and moments when he realized he was no longer leading the conversation. Victoria recovered faster. Of course, she did what she always did. Her smile returned again, thinner now, but still present, still performing for the room. I am sure whatever documentation you have can be reviewed at another time, she said, turning slightly toward the guests, as if to remind them and herself that she still controlled the setting. Tonight is not the place for legal discussions. The man finally looked at her fully, and for the first time there was something in his expression that shifted. Not emotion, not anger, but certainty. Tonight, he said calmly, is exactly the place. He lifted the document fully now. No longer angled, no longer subtle, the printed names visible to anyone close enough to see. A few guests leaned in without meaning to. A few others stepped closer. The room was no longer pretending. This property, he continued, is not listed under your name. Silence. Real silence now. Not polite, not controlled. The kind that expands. Victoria did not respond immediately. For the first time, she did not have a line ready. My father's attention snapped to the document. Then back to the man, then finally to me, something sharper in his eyes, now something closer to realization. Then whose name is it under? He asked the question, coming out more direct than he intended. The man did not answer him. He turned the page slowly, deliberately, and then he spoke, not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly enough for everyone in that immediate space to hear. Emily Carter. And just like that, the room shifted again. The name did not echo. It settled, quiet, heavy, undeniable. I watched it land on every face, close enough to hear it, watch the shift move outward in small, controlled waves as people processed what had just been said. Emily Carter, my name. Not as an afterthought, not as an introduction, as an answer. My father blinked once slow, like his mind was trying to reorder something that no longer fit. That is not possible, he said, but the confidence was gone from his voice. Replaced with something thinner, something searching. He looked at Victoria, expecting correction, expecting alignment, expecting the version of reality they had always shared. She did not give it to him. For the first time, she said nothing. The man in the suit did not rush to fill the silence. He simply turned the document slightly enough for both of them to see clearly now the signature line, the registered owner, the date. Details, clean, final. The transfer was completed 6 months ago. He said, his tone unchanged, as if time itself had already confirmed everything. 6 months. I remembered the exact day, not emotionally, structurally. The meeting, the papers. The moment I chose not to explain anything. I had learned that explanations were rarely heard in this house. Results were. My father took a half step closer, his eyes scanning the page, searching for something to dispute, something to question, something to control. This property was intended for family use, he said, holding on to the language that had always worked for him. Intended, assumed, directed. The man's response came without hesitation. It is, he said. A pause, just long enough. She is family. That landed differently. Not because of the words, but because of the definition. Victoria's posture shifted again, subtle but visible to anyone who knew where to look. Her shoulders tightened, her chin lifting slightly. The way she recalibrated when she realized the room was no longer following her lead. There must be some error in the documentation, she said, her voice smooth, but the timing just slightly delayed. We would have been informed. I finally moved then, just one step forward. Not dramatic, not confrontational. Enough to place myself fully in the center of the moment they had tried to control. You were, I said. My voice was steady. Not raised, not sharp, just clear. Both of them looked at me at the same time. That was new. You just did not read it. Silence again, but this time it was different. Not confusion, recognition. The guests were no longer pretending to look away. Phones were no longer lowered. People leaned in, not physically, but with attention, with focus, with the understanding that whatever this was, it was no longer private. My father's expression hardened not into control, but into something closer to realization. Why was this not discussed? He asked the question, directed at me now, not the man, not the document. Me. I met his gaze without hesitation. Because you never asked, I said. No anger, no emphasis, just fact. Victoria inhaled slowly, preparing to speak, to redirect, to reclaim, but the room did not wait for her this time. The narrative had already shifted, and for the first time, they were the ones trying to catch up. No one tried to interrupt anymore. That was the shift. Not loud, not dramatic, but absolute. The room had moved past denial and into something else entirely, something quieter and far more dangerous for them. Awareness. Victoria's fingers tightened slightly around the stem of her glass, the only visible sign that her control was slipping, even as her expression remained carefully composed. She turned her head just enough to scan the room, to measure the attention, to calculate how much of this had already been seen, already understood. Too much. My father straightened instinctively, trying to reclaim posture, authority, structure, but there was a delay now in everything he did, a fraction of a second that had never been there before. Emily, he said more firmly this time, as if repeating my name could re-establish hierarchy. This is not how these matters are handled. I held his gaze. It is now. The words were simple. No emphasis, no tension. Just a quiet correction. He paused. And in that pause, I saw it clearly. He did not have a next move, not one that worked here, not one that worked in front of this many witnesses. The man beside me closed the folder with a soft, precise motion, the sound barely audible, but it marked something. A transition, from explanation to conclusion. There is one more detail, he said, not raising his voice yet. The room adjusted again, instinctively listening. Victoria turned back toward him. Her smile thinner, now stretched into place rather than natural. I think we have heard enough for tonight, she said, her tone polished but no longer in control. He did not acknowledge the interruption. The property is not only registered under Miss Carter's name, he continued, each word placed carefully, it is also the holding address for the trust associated with Hayes Development. That landed differently. Not emotional, structural. I watched my father's expression change again. Faster this time, sharper. Recognition, realization, calculation. That is a private matter, he said quickly, too quickly, stepping forward half an inch, trying to contain the scope of what had just been revealed. The man's response came without pause. Not anymore. Silence followed deeper than before. A few guests exchanged looks openly now. One man near the bar lowered his phone slowly, not out of disinterest, but because he no longer needed to pretend he was not watching. Victoria inhaled slow and controlled, preparing to speak again, to redirect, to reshape, but her timing was gone. You should have informed us, she said, her voice quieter, now less for the room and more for me. I tilted my head slightly, considering the statement not emotionally, just analytically. You should have asked, I replied. The same structure, the same truth. My father's attention shifted fully to me now, no longer divided, no longer dismissive. Focused. What exactly are you implying, he asked. I did not answer immediately. I let the question sit, let the room lean in, let the weight of it build. Then I spoke calm, measured, final. I am not implying anything I said. A pause. Just enough. I am clarifying. The word lingered. Clarifying. It did not sound like a defense. It sounded like a closing statement. I could see it settle across the room, the way people adjusted their posture when they realized they were no longer watching a misunderstanding, but a correction unfolding in real time. My father held my gaze, searching for something he could still challenge, still reshape into a version he recognized, but there was nothing left to negotiate. Victoria's expression shifted again, slower, now more controlled but thinner, stretched over something that was no longer holding. She set her glass down carefully, the soft click against the table, louder than it should have been in the silence. Then clarify, she said, her voice even but no longer leading. The invitation was not for me, it was for the room. I did not rush. I let a second pass, then another, long enough for attention to tighten, for every nearby conversation to disappear completely. 6 months ago, I said, the ownership structure of Hayes Development changed. No one interrupted. Not this time. The trust associated with that structure, I continued, was transferred to a new primary holder. My father's eyes sharpened, tracking each word now with precision, not emotion. Victoria did not move at all. The property on Westbrook Avenue, I said, is the registered address of that trust. I paused, not for effect, but because the next part did not need emphasis. It needed clarity. And that trust answers to me. Silence followed. Not confusion, not disbelief. Understanding. It spread slowly, piece by piece, as the connections aligned. The man beside me did not speak. He did not need to. His presence had already validated everything that mattered. A guest near the center of the room exhaled quietly, almost involuntarily. Another shifted his stance, no longer pretending to be neutral. The room had recalibrated. My father's voice came next, lower, controlled, but no longer certain. That would require authorization, he said. It did. I did not raise my voice. I did not add anything unnecessary. Just fact. Victoria finally moved a small step forward, her composure still intact on the surface but the timing gone. From whom, she asked. I met her eyes steady without hesitation. From the only party that still held controlling interest, I said. A pause. Just enough. Before it was reassigned. That was the moment it fully landed. Not as a claim, as a structure they recognized, as a process they could not dismiss. My father's posture shifted again, not outward but inward, recalculating, reorganizing, understanding the implications in real time. Victoria's silence said more than anything else she could have offered. Around us, the room had stopped pretending entirely. No music mattered, no setting mattered, only this. Only what had just been made clear. I adjusted my sleeve once, the same quiet motion as before. Not out of habit, but because the moment had reached its natural end. You were concerned about appearances, I said, my tone even almost conversational. So was I. I let the words settle. No emphasis, no tension. Just alignment. That is why I waited until now. And for the first time that night, no one tried to respond. No one spoke for a long moment after that, not because they did not have anything to say, but because for the first time, nothing they said would change what had already been established. The room had shifted completely. What started as a controlled evening, carefully curated down to every detail, had turned into something else entirely. Not chaos, not conflict, exposure. I watched my father as he stood there, his posture still upright, still composed on the surface, but the precision was gone. The certainty that had defined every decision he made was no longer there. He looked at the document again, then at me, then back at the man beside me, trying to reconstruct the sequence in his mind, trying to understand when control had left his hands. Victoria did not move. That was the clearest sign. She who always had a response, always had a line prepared, always knew exactly how to guide a room, now stood completely still, her expression composed but empty of direction. The guests were no longer pretending. Conversations had stopped entirely. Attention was no longer divided. Every eye in that space had settled on us, not out of curiosity anymore, but recognition. They understood what had happened. They understood who held the position now. I reached for my glass again, not to drink, just to hold it, the cool surface grounding steady. Small details, they always mattered. You were worried about being embarrassed, I said, my voice calm even. Carrying just enough to reach those closest without needing to rise. Victoria's gaze snapped back to me sharp now, but still without a response. I met her eyes without hesitation. You were not embarrassed, I continued, letting the words settle naturally without force. You were exposed. Silence followed again, but this time it was different. Not heavy, not tense. Final. The kind of silence that comes after something has already ended. My father exhaled slowly, the sound controlled. But it carried the weight of realization. He did not argue, he did not correct. There was nothing left to correct. The structure had been made clear, the room had witnessed it, the narrative they had relied on no longer held. The man beside me closed the folder completely and stepped back half a step, not retreating, just signaling that his role was done. He had not come to argue, he had come to confirm. And that confirmation had already been delivered. I set the glass back down gently on the table, the soft sound marking the end of the moment more clearly than anything else. Around us, people began to shift again, not away, but differently. The way a room resets after something important has just taken place. If you have ever found yourself in a situation where the people who were supposed to support you instead tried to diminish you, comment number 1. If you have ever witnessed a story like this happen in another family, comment number 2. And if you believe no one should ever have to stand in a room like this to prove their worth, comment number 3, or share your own thoughts below. I did not wait for a response. I did not need one. Some moments do not require applause, they require clarity, and that was enough.